Erin, there are so many things about this that make it a really great piece. It's fun. It's bouncy looking. The round shapes look like balls. Maybe they also look chubby or even, I don't know, pregnant. Um, let's see. I tried to show a close-up here so you could see what I was talking about with a filter. Maybe put the black lines on a layer above the filter. Um, Also, when I look at those wavy lines at top, see the way that they're filled. That's something that Illustrator does by accident. We all see the same effect in the Y. And I would say work for a result that looks like it was controlled. Sometimes you can take a happy accident and turn it into a nice work of art, but I think here I I'd encourage you to try to push that a little further if you get the chance, or if you work similarly in future. One last comment is to do with the hearts, which seem to be drawn with a different type of stroke. It looks like a chisel tip was used there, where none was used with the word baby. Well, Kendall, I'd like to congratulate you for success with what was actually a difficult color harmony. You know, we can look at Erin's work just above yours in the film strip here, and while her harmony is quite correct, it's also a simple one with just a couple of colors. And here you've got so many colors, and I know you worked to make it fit. Um, Also, you experimented with filters, and I know this is called a stained glass filter, but it really reminds me more of mosaic, which is another sort of design one might find in a church. Let's see. Now, if I were to say anything, it might have to do with the small crosses that we see above the central one. I'm just wondering why they would be different in proportion. Might it be that the large cross would overlap the small ones to the rear? I also think of this story of 3 crosses and wonder why there are 5. Or maybe this is a cemetery with crosses all in rows. Well, Beverly, adding the transparency here has helped. I understand that this is mainly a monochromatic harmony. However, addition of that cyan border sort of changes things, so analogous fits better. One thing I would say, and I've said this before, is to use the ideas about spatial location and color to create more illusion in your work. Also, I wonder whether there's the possibility of creating a shape that is somehow more complex than just a rectangle. Hi Nina, you've come up with another very compelling design, and the presentation is lovely too, the way you framed this up in Photoshop. By the way, if I was going to frame this in life, I would take the Photoshop frame off of it first. Also, I think this is a nice harmony to work with. I believe it's one that some of your classmates pointed out, having a sort of southwest quality. I know that was funny when you talked about another harmony looking like Easter threw up all over the place. Well, very fine work, and I want to encourage you to be persistent in your studies, to mind deadlines, and to keep at it, because I think you can really go someplace. Vicky, this is a marvelous work. There are so many qualities to this that are engaging, and from the draft state, you've taken a long way too. Um, I love its curious shape, the way the sides bow in, and there's a lot that's happening spatially because of the way shapes become smaller, and because of the way that the color theory is working. Also, the overlapping wide, narrow shape, the horizontal one in center, plays an interesting role. Hard to figure out where that is spatially, but it's pretty convincing. Color harmony wise, I know you said you had 2 harmonies going here, and I think when that happens, things get a little confusing. I note that you have analogous colors starting with red and wrapping around the color wheel to green. And then there's a sort of violet color, and there's also a shade of a sort of blue cyan color in those 3 boxes in the center. I think that that's one area where things could have been a little more clear. I'm also wondering about how centered those 3 shapes in center are, and whether you might just double check that with a grid. I would say this is a very lovely work, even if we can't pin a harmony name on it. Angie, you know, this work came a long way from assignment 3 in week 5, and then even while subtle, you know, the changes that were made from the draft phase to the final are significant, and I think the resulting work is really beautiful. Couple of things. I agree with one of your classmates. You know, when I think nautical, I'm thinking ropes and anchors. However, you're right. You know, the blue prevails. So maybe in a subtle way, we've got a nautical feel here. Also, you mentioned that this was a symmetrical design. Maybe what you meant was that it's a balanced design, because it certainly is not symmetrical. Maybe check the definition on that. I wanted to say that one thing I really like is this empty star in the foreground. I like the way that that's just flat and not illusionistic there in the corner, where we're so aware that we're not looking into a window or into deep space, but at something that's really flat. Well, Vicky, I'd say what you have here is some understated elegance. You know, this work seems incredibly simple, but I believe that it's justified by the integrity of your writing. Also, I would say that the resolution on this file is not really sufficient for portfolio, so I'd like you to go back and see if you can save differently so that we're not getting, you know, the wavy lines in there, so that we don't have artifacts. Well, Megan, you know, I think this is a better solution than what you were setting out to do in your proposal. First of all, it deals with color, and second of all, it's something that you can do with the design software, you know, with regard to the skills that you currently have with it. I noticed that a lot of care went into placing things exactly, and that you've done a neat job of alternating whether squares are tucked under or over certain shapes. And I even like those shadowy stars that are seen behind the green panels in center. I think all in all, this is a very lovely work, and I'd like to congratulate you on your success. Hi, Kat. This is a real eye dazzler of a design. You know, I wrote in some notes to you elsewhere, if you want to fit a design into perspective, if you're in Photoshop, try edit, transform, and then free transform, or edit, transform, distort, and you should be able to fit things in by yanking corners and so on. Let's see. Well, you know, I feel like here, the file that we see depicted in the film strip on left is pretty much the same as one of the thumbnails in week 5, assignment 3, and on right, what you've got is a little rough. It might have been a nice idea to take the two of them and combine them, something like the way in which we put the color wheel into assignment 3 last week. So if you have, you know, nice polished version of the design as we see on left, and you enlarge the canvas in Photoshop, for example, and then copy and paste the kitchen scene so that both of them are part of the same composition, where we've got the design and a view of how it could be used all together presented as one tableau. Derek, you know, I really like the colors here in your final project. I do wonder about the way that the fleur-de-lis shape stretches. I think it would be best to use a consistent plan in the arrangement of the shapes, and if you change their proportion, there should be a rhyme or reason to how you do it and why. And you know, I'm wondering too about the green stripes going over the fleur-de-lis. And while that's, you know, something you could do, it ought to look intentional. I understand this is something you might like to stencil, and I thought it was an interesting idea that you'd like to put green on the wall, because some of the food that you eat in this room is also green.